Geek Therapy Radio.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome to the Geek Therapy Radio podcast. You've got your mental curator, Johnny Hamburger, the last podcast for a few days. Tomorrow, my wife and I leave for the Guadalupe River in Seguin, Texas, where I'm going to float my dinghy out on that there water and drink beer and probably pee in the river because it's there and I'm not rowing all the way back to shore to too much information. So anyways, this is the last episode for a few days, but be sure to follow me if you haven't. I mean, be sure. I'm a podcast host, not a cop. If you want to, feel free to follow me on social media, Geek Therapy Radio, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube's. Although I might upload something from YouTube. I'm bringing my drone on the trip. All I'm saying is that regardless that there's not going to be a podcast for the next few days while I'm on vacation, not working, I'm probably still going to be posting things here and there on the Geek Therapy Radio Facebook page. There's going to be plenty to freak out about on the river. I'm going to be grilling, cooking. Oh, I am so looking forward to this. So Geek Therapy Radio across all social media. Once again, as always, just look for the red, white, and black color scheme. And that's how you know for sure it's me, Johnny Hamburger, at Geek Therapy Radio, or on Geek Therapy Radio, and also at Geek Therapy Radio. Though on Twitter, I think it's technically at Geek Therapy KPRC is the official handle, and that's just because Twitter handles, unless something's changed, you can't make them longer than a certain length of character, so I had to do Geek Therapy, and then the call sign from the radio station I'm on, KPRC. Whatever, just search in Twitter, Geek Therapy Radio, red, white, and black color scheme, there you go. Twitter is, I found, to be the easiest way to, but other than email, geektherapy@iheartmedia.com or www.geektherapyradio.com. I found Twitter to be the easiest way to instantly interact with listeners. So if you're out there thinking, oh, well, he's probably got 1 million emails a day, he probably did. No, I don't. I really, I don't. It's comical. It's nice that you'd think that, but I really don't. That being said, Twitter is still the most instantaneous way to interact with me about anything. So whatever you're a geek about, share it with me on Twitter. Some interact more than others, and I fully appreciate it. And you know what I realized? Well, I didn't just realize this, but as far as email is concerned and interaction through the website, it would really seem that most of my listeners are international, which is great. I have found that, looking at statistics and demographics, by far, most listeners are here in the United States, and by far, most listeners are here in my city, Houston, Texas, because that's where the radio show broadcasts from. But as far as the podcast is concerned, while, again, looking at demographics, it's mostly United States and mostly Texas, for the most part, the most interaction I get through email is by far from international listeners all over the world. The United Kingdom, Israel, I'm just going off the top of my head here, Brazil, Japan, New Zealand, Australia, Ireland. I'm just listing off the people who have emailed me from these countries. And there are people who just email, hey, I'm a listener from overseas, keep up the great work or whatever, which is really nice. And I very much appreciate it. And they don't go into specifics, and I'm not sure I can track where it comes from, nor really would I. It seems kind of creepy to track where emails come from. If someone didn't want to tell me in the email where they're emailing me from, then I'm not going to try to look up where they are emailing from. But I just appreciate having all that international listenership. It's really cool, and it really kind of boggles my mind that I have so much international listenership, and I can't quite put my finger on exactly why that is. I've had some international listeners, more than one, tell me that they listen to my podcast as a way of practicing their English or getting more familiar with English, brushing up on their English, even though they speak really, really good English for the most part. That listening to me somehow helps them with their English, and which is funny because sometimes I feel like an idiot with my grammar. I don't know if that might be surprising to some of you listening, but I do have an app that's a word of the day app, and I do find that most of the time the app tells me words that I already know. For some reason, I was typing an email. It was an email to a fellow coworker who's going to be filling in for me while I'm on the Guadalupe River drinking beer and peeing in the river, maybe. I was emailing him shift notes, just notes about, what to look out for when running the Blowtorch KTRH from noon to 8 p.m. And I was typing away, and I used the word sporadic. I said, watch out for liners and stingers because they are sporadic, meaning sometimes they're there, sometimes they're not. They're spread out. It's just sporadic. And I was thinking, why did I use that word in this email when I could have just said, watch out for liners and stingers. They are all over the place. It just, for me, sporadic was a better word. And I don't see too many other people talking like that in inter-office emails. And I just wonder, do I sound like a douche using the word sporadic in an email? And maybe what I'm getting at here is I try to expand my vocabulary, and it's hard to gauge, from the inside looking out, whether or not I'm able to do that or have done it, because a lot of times I feel like I'm stuck for word choice. A lot of times I just brain fart. You can't do a podcast, you can't do a radio show where the entire goal is to talk stream of consciousness for several minutes at a time. You can't do that without occasionally having a brain fart. And it's a brain fart on the simplest words. On the absolute simplest words, I get hung up. Oh, what's the word I'm looking for? It's incumbent? No. Natural? No. I get hung up on words. And so it's all I'm getting at is when international listeners tell me sometimes that they listen to Geek Therapy Radio because first of all, we're all geeks about something. And I try to cover a diverse range of topics here in Geek Therapy Radio. Mostly it's just what I'm geeking about at the moment, but I tend to geek out about a lot of different things. Who knows what I'm going to be geeking out about whenever you tune into Geek Therapy Radio. So we're all geeks about something. That's first and foremost why they tune in. They found me through interviews with the 8-Bit Guy or Colin from This Does Not Compute or Lazy Game Reviews, Clint. And that's how they initially find me. And they listen to me because we have that common geekdom in common. But then to hear that secondarily, it's because they use me to brush up on their English or hear some English. It's like, why? I don't know. That's kind of, I appreciate that a lot. And I do. One of the things I've tried to learn that anybody who gets into podcasting or radio, definitely radio, but also podcasting, I get asked, for advice quite often. How should I get into podcasting? What should I do? And usually my first bit of advice is, we all have settled into our speech pattern. We've all settled into our grammar. We've all settled into our syntax and the way we pronounce words. And it's typically talking to the average person just out on the street, mixed company. We tend to slur a lot. We tend to blend words together a lot. We tend to use a lot of contractions. We tend to use a lot of slang and just really slur our speech in general. I don't I don't think I talk like this around the house. I don't think I talk like this with my wife, unless she says what, and then I articulate it as best I can. So my advice to people thinking about getting into radio, even just thinking about getting into radio or starting a podcast, it's not entirely necessary, but I tell them practice your speech and practice your pronunciation. Practice being articulate with your speech, because at first it's going to sound very foreign, and if you talk to any human being using that tone or that kind of pronunciation, they're going to think something's wrong with you. But what happens is when you practice your pronunciation, you practice your diction, you practice speaking clearly and intelligibly every syllable, what happens is you settle into your own groove so that when you speak articulately, it still sounds like you. It doesn't sound like you're a robot and you are trying to speak every syllable as best you can from every area in your mouth so that words that are 3 syllables don't come out as 1 syllable. Sounds weird. But eventually you get into your groove to where it's like practicing anything, muscle memory, building your muscles. Your speech becomes articulate without sounding robotic. It sounds naturally articulate. So that's kind of the advice I give to anybody thinking about podcasting or getting into radio. It's not entirely necessary. There are podcasts that are infinitely more popular and more widespread than mine, where the hosts slur their way through the entire podcast. You can hear what they're saying, but it's not articulate speech, which is fine. But it helps immensely if you do slur a lot to practice pronunciation and practice your speech patterns. Eventually, it becomes natural. It's not critical, it's not required, but it is a huge help. So maybe me having practice over the years articulating speech and having it sound natural, maybe that's why some overseas listeners tell me that they listen to my show because it helps them with their English, perhaps. Are you one of those people overseas? Does listening to my show somehow help you with your English? If that's the case, I would really like to hear from you. Geek Therapy at iHeartMedia.com, GeekTherapyRadio.com. Just fill out the contact form right there, or just tweet at me, Geek Therapy Radio, on Twitter. Is there something about my speech that helps you with your English? Because it's really weird. It's really weird for me to hear that. I speak English. Here's the thing about Americans. It's not strange. Everybody around the world who's ever dealt with Americans knows this, among other things. But we live basically in a landlocked country. We're isolated. The only people that speak another language are to the south of us. So if Americans know a second language, dollars to donuts, I would wager that most of the time it's Spanish, because it makes sense. Our only neighboring country that speaks a different language is Mexico, and then further on to South America. Occasionally you'll hear Portuguese. Occasionally you might hear, I don't know, some other more specific dialects coming from other Central American countries. But for the most part, if you live in the United States and if you do know a second language, it's Spanish. Second would probably be, oh man, I struggle to see what second is. French, I would say. Probably German. But most of it is going to be Spanish. In high school, in high school, I learned French. But here's the thing. You use it or lose it. I don't travel around the world enough for me to need to use French. And when I travel to Europe, occasionally I'll brush up on French, even if I'm going to a country that doesn't speak French, even if I'm going to Germany or Denmark or the Netherlands or I was going to say France, obviously France, Belgium, lots of French speakers in Belgium. Lots of French speakers everywhere. The point is that if both of you don't know English, which is extremely rare because most Europeans learn English from the time they're children on up, they learn English, as well as their native language. So if they don't speak English and I obviously don't speak their native language, odds are there's a good chance that we can both muddle our way through enough French to get directions or ask where the bathroom is or, get some basic information. But the thing, Americans, we don't need to learn other languages because we aren't constantly interacting with people from neighboring countries that speak another language. You can live in the Netherlands and you can learn Dutch, and then you're constantly interacting with Germans, and then you're constantly interacting with French, and then you're constantly interacting with British. So odds are most Europeans know more languages because they have to, because they interact with so many more of their neighbors directly on their borders that speak different languages. United States, there are some dialects of English that are unrecognizable. There's Cajun, which is like a mix between, I think it's called Creole. It's a mix between English and French, and God knows what. It's its own language. There are some people speaking English where you don't have a clue what they're saying. There's some British that you hear. For Americans most of us, maybe I speak for myself, understand the British accent just fine most of the time. For me, if it's particularly thick, I have to just get in the zone. You have to listen to it for a little while. It's like watching the British version of The Office, the original version of The Office, Ricky Gervais. They speak, it sounds to me like very authentic English, very authentic British English, and it's thick and it's slurred and it's slangy, and you have to listen. I have to listen for a few episodes and just get into that groove, into that style of English before I understand exactly what all the characters in the show are saying. Versus we've all seen it. We all know this, that when there's English, British English, United Kingdom, the Queen's English being spoken on a TV show or a movie that's intended for international audiences, it's a very different style of the English you would hear two British people speaking on the street. It's gotta be. And I think that the English I speak, the American English that I speak on my show, is not the best representation of the English you'd hear on average in the street. I think that most Americans do speak articulately enough, but depends where you are, depends who you're talking to. It all depends. It really, really depends. So I just try to speak articulately, partly knowing because this brand of English, this show is going to reach an international audience, and I want to be as clear as I can. Does that all make sense? How did I get off on the tangent of speaking English? of my particular brand of English. I will wrap up by saying this. This is going to be a shorter podcast. Just kind of random thoughts. I will say this. I was born and raised in Texas. I was born miles from the Alamo in San Antonio. I am a true red-blooded Texan. Most of the time, people listening to the show might not know that because I tend to speak in what's known as non-dialect. I don't have an accent that you can pin on Californian dude, or Texan, or New York, or Boston. All those different accents, all are English. Midwest, oh, don't you know? Welcome to Minnesota. We have a bunch of different accents here in the United States. I was born and raised in Texas. Think I should be speaking with a drawl. And sometimes it does come out. Depends who I'm talking to. Depends on my mood, how many beers I've had. But it comes out a little bit. But I wasn't raised in a household speaking any accent. My dad was a broadcaster from Boston. He had a Boston accent before he got into broadcasting and journalism, where they trained him to have this non-dialect accent. So people listening to me on the radio or on the podcast, it's not so easy to recognize where I'm from because I have been raised in a house with a broadcaster speaking non-dialect. It's very interesting. And my son is probably going to be born and have the same type of accent, which is this non-accent English. this undefinable non-regional English, I guess you could say. But of course, we'll see. He may forego English altogether and say, I want to speak German. Okay. And then move to Germany and he'll be an expat. Whatever he wants to do is fine. I think I'm going to start wrapping up the show there. Actually, I did a quick 286 update. I will get the video up on Patreon as soon as humanly possible. This has turned into quite the ordeal, but I finally got my Compaq Desk Pro where I wanted it last night. I got the real-time clock in, the new CMOS battery real-time clock, the Dallas DS1287 chip replacement. It's a Symphony like LS1287, whatever. I've got a battery on the motherboard, and that makes all the difference in the world. It's now reading beautifully from my IDE to Compact Flash adapter. It's booting perfectly. I installed DOS 6.22. I installed Windows 3.1. It is you just take all the disks out of the drive, no disks in any drive. You turn the power on. I've edited my autoexec.bat. It boots right into Windows. It is glorious, glorious, glorious. I will get that video up on Patreon as soon as humanly possible. So, thank you so much for listening to the Geek Therapy Radio podcast. You are worthy of love. You are worthy of giving love. You are worthy of receiving love. You are also worthy of your own self-respect and your own self-confidence. So embrace your inner geek. Share it with others. Be safe. And I'll talk to you on the other side. Take care.